Hi and welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and on this episode I'm going to go through my collection of I think a misunderstood band, one of my favorite bands to come out of the mid to late 80s, right in the heart of the hair metal scene. They looked the part, they didn't exactly sound the part, and the music I think still really stands up over time. I'm talking about Cinderella. I haven't got a lot of vinyl, but I do have a lot of music to talk to you about, so I'll get this one started on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. First Cinderella album came out in 1986. Yeah, I know, all you hair metal detractors have a good long laugh at this cover. This is Night Songs, first album by Cinderella, and they were pretty glammed out on this album cover. But if you actually listen to the album, it's actually a pretty heavy album. It's the heaviest thing they ever did, for sure. And I've got a Canadian issue here on Mercury Polygram, which wasn't the easiest thing for me to track down. It's got a little scuffs here, but band photos in the back, lots of credits, and I know there's a lyric sleeve that actually came with this. My copy does not have. That's all right. I just have a plain plastic sleeve, and it's got the usual red Mercury label they were using at the time. And this is what Night Songs looks like on CD. This is a US version. CDs were relatively new, so I don't think there were a lot of changes that were made. There's certainly no Cinderella reissues, at least not in the States. So this is probably the only copy, even a Canadian copy wouldn't look all that different, except for the address. It's got the atomic Mercury sort of look to the CD itself. Bon Jovi CDs, Def Leppard, Rush, Kiss, they all look like this. And inside the CD, same credits that were on the back cover of the record. The next Cinderella album came out in 1988. It's my personal favorite. I think a lot of people share that opinion. Long Cold Winter. Very basic album cover, but kind of says it all. This is embossed or raised lettering here, and a little bit of ring wear. On an all-white album cover, ring wear is really hard to mask. This is a Canadian edition, again on Mercury. Song titles are all written out there. It's a little hard to read. It's like calligraphy. And this was the first Cinderella album that I got. So here's a photo of the band, and on the backs is also available. So that's Night Songs, and then Night Songs, the videos, which are VHS tapes, or like home video VHS for music videos were becoming popular at this point. And so here on this side, we've got the lyrics and all the credits. And the record itself is the same, except it's a little bit stylized where it's got the Cinderella logo and the album title, but other than that, it's the usual red Mercury logo. And this is the CD. It's a US copy. I like this album a lot. This is, as I'm filming, it's hard to believe this is an album. Anything that came out in 1988 is now 30 years old, which just blows my little mind. So there's the CD itself. It's not the atomic one anymore. It's just all silver with the logo there. I always liked that logo too. And nothing different in the CD booklet that wouldn't have been on the record or cassette. Still the also available. These used to come in so handy for letting you know, hey, there's other stuff for you to buy. It worked for me anyway. So there's all the lyrics and the credits. And yeah, these first two Cinderella albums are just, to me, they're just classic albums that, you know, I think people that, if you like blues-based hard rock, if you like AC/DC and Aerosmith, you're thrown off by that look. I'd still say give those a listen. You know, I can understand some of the rock purists not liking a band like Poison that I happen to like, but Cinderella, give them a chance. It's different. It's not the same thing. So 1990 saw the release of the next Cinderella album, and a big change for them sonically. Heartbreak Station. You can almost tell by looking at it. It's not exactly going to be a glam album at this point. Not that the last album looked glam. This is a US copy, and still on Mercury Records. Very different production on this, very rootsy sounding, dry. It's not the big reverb drums like there was on the first two albums, which I loved. Although I still liked this album. If you were to describe it to me at the time, I probably said, well, I'm not going to like that, but it is Cinderella. It's still Tom Keifer singing, so I liked it. Don't listen to it as much as the first two, but it's still good. It still did fairly well. This is just on the cusp of the grunge thing happening. So this big fold out inside of here. Collage of pictures. That was pretty common at the time for bands to do. And then also available, we've got now 2 home videos and 2 records. And here's all of the lyrics and the credits for Heartbreak Station. Long gap between that and the next Cinderella album. Tom Keifer developed some serious vocal cord issues, which he still kind of suffers from to this day. He's got to be very, very careful with it. But his style of singing, I mean, if you've never heard, if you think Brian Johnson of AC/DC, a little more tuneful. That's nothing against Brian, but Cinderella could deliver a ballad as effectively as they could deliver a bluesy hard rock song and just about anything in between. But it caught up to him, the way that he sang. So it was a long wait. And something, of course, between 1990 and 1994, the music scene, the rock scene, monumental changes. So a few bands bravely kept putting out new music. And it was the strangest thing. In the fall of 1994, two bands that both emerged in 1986 with their first albums, came out with new material, new music. One band released an album that was a top 20 album and went gold. It wasn't double platinum, but it was still a chart, it was still a certification, it was still successful. And another band released an album that just sunk way into obscurity, and practically the band dropped off the face of the earth. The band that succeeded was Tesla. They put out their Busted Nut album, and it did fairly well. They had songs that were on mainstream rock radio, and they still had a gold record out of it. Cinderella put this album out, Still Climbing. And like I said, it faded out. It hit the charts low for 1 week, and then it disappeared. And yeah, that was it for them for many, many years. Sad, because it's a good album. I think I like it a little bit better than Heartbreak Station. It's more like Heartbreak Station than any other album, but a little more gritty, a little heavier slightly on the production. And this is actually a Canadian version. I bought it when it first came out before it hit the delete bins. Glad I paid full price for it, though. It was worth it. And there's your lyrics and a little bit of credits. So, yeah, Cinderella got hit really, really hard by the grunge thing, and they kind of went underground, like a lot of bands did. I'm happy to say they didn't try to do a grunge album, like Skid Row or Warrant or Dokken. I can't picture Tom Keifer doing that. I mean, Cinderella is essentially Tom Keifer's baby. I mean, he's the songwriter, lead singer, lead guitarist. I mean, he's the mastermind behind the group. I'm not saying that the other guys didn't play a part, but I mean, it's really his, it's his band. 1997, I mean, the fact is they had 3 platinum albums, a handful of top 40 hits, a lot of mainstream rock hits, so Mercury put together the inevitable best of, called Once Upon a ... 2 girls that you see there were in the video to Somebody Save Me, one of their earliest ones, which also included a cameo appearance from John Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora. If anybody knows anything about Cinderella knows that John Bon Jovi was instrumental in getting them signed to Mercury. And this album contains the highlights from the first 4 albums. It includes their version of Janis Joplin's Move Over, which they recorded for the Stairway to Heaven, Highway to Hell album, which is an album that was put out in 1989 by various hard rock bands covering songs by people that had died from drug or alcohol abuse. And I'm happy to see that it found a home here. Not all of the songs that were recorded on that album made it to the band's albums that appeared on it, like Skid Row's Holiday in the Sun, the Sex Pistols cover they did. It never appeared on one of their albums because they weren't on that label. I think that's one reason for it. And there was one new song on here. I think it was a leftover from Heartbreak Station called War Stories. Still a good tune. This is a Canadian Columbia House issue. Good mix CD. There's a lot of best ofs from Cinderella. I don't have any others except for this. And what I don't like about them, I mean, they put out, their albums. Still Climbing is not on here, probably because it had been deleted. They just got the first 3 on there, which is kind of crappy. More pictures than anything else, not a lot of credits, because it was all the label that put it together, and probably everybody at the label, nobody knew anything about Cinderella. Like, who's this? And this is a glam band. I'm a big grunge fan, you can tell. Anyway, So eventually, like a lot of bands, Cinderella got back together in the turn of the century. It sounds weird to say that. From the 90s and the 2000s, started touring again, started doing quite well. And I was fortunate enough to catch them a great bill in 2000. And I can't remember if the tour had a name or not, but it was Poison was the headliner. Cinderella played right before them, Dokken before that, and Slaughter opened up. And I'm not really a Slaughter fan, but they put on a good show, and that was a good bill. That might have been the best full bill I've ever seen. It was just a lot of fun. And I'm happy to say that when we saw them in Augusta, it was a pretty packed house, so there was still an appetite for this kind of music. And at the merch stands at that concert, Cinderella were selling a live album, and it's just called Live. No label. They just put it up themselves. It's all the copies that were available were signed. I didn't meet them, so they all came like this. And this is pretty much, it's a memento of that show because it's the set list that they did. Nothing from Still Climbing. I'll start from the first 3 albums, but man, did they ever put on a good show. Tom Keifer, great front man, got a lot of Steven Tyler in him, but plays that grand piano, wheels that out for Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone. It was really good. Customized the CD. Looks kind of cool. And just a single panel on the back cover saying, and that was the original band that got back together for that. So, they toured for a bit longer. Then there was a long hiatus, and members kind of splintered off to other things. 2013, Tom Keifer put out his very first solo album, and I've said this many times on this show. I'm not a follower of people from bands that put out solo albums. I just don't follow every side project and solo album that these people do. I just don't do it unless I happen to hear a song I really like, and then I get it and I check it out. Well, I made an exception when I found out that Tom was doing a solo album because this is the closest thing that we're going to get to a brand new Cinderella album. I don't think there's ever going to be another one. The sad thing is that they actually recorded an album in the late 90s for John Kalodner's Portrait Records, the label that Rat and Great White and a few other bands were. Portrait was a label name that Kalodner, famous A&R guy, resurrected and got a bunch of bands back together to record albums, none of which really took off. But Cinderella was one of those bands, but for some reason it never got released. It was the third Damn Yankees album that was apparently recorded too, and the band themselves weren't happy with it. So maybe someday we'll see the reissue of that long, unheard 5th Cinderella album. But the next closest thing in 2013 is Tom Keifer's solo album, The Way Life Goes. So this came out on a label called Morovy Records. And, you could have almost stuck the Cinderella logo on this and I'd have bought it. I'd have, not bought it, physically bought it, which I did, but I would have said, yeah, that makes sense. Because the best songs on here could easily fit on a Cinderella album. More like Heartbreak Station than anything else. That's really his, he's not a metal guy, he's not really a hard rock guy, just a bluesy guitar player. His vocals are back, he sounds great, and he's been touring this album since it came out. As a matter of fact, he recently reissued a deluxe version of it, which I didn't pick up, but I would recommend this album. Anybody that ever liked Cinderella, if you're wondering what he sounds like now, he sounds good, and like I said, there's some mellower stuff on here. Some of it may be a little country-based, but not. It can't be too much, or I wouldn't have liked it, honestly. But, Solid Ground, for instance, the song that kicks that off, it's just classic Cinderella sounding. And since he was so much to do with the band, then it makes sense. It's got his sound on it. So, a band that I don't think gets their props, and probably never will get that, musical respect, that should be doing well better. I'd like to see Tom's band in concert. He's got a full band, background singers, the whole 9 yards, and from any clips I've seen, he does a lot of the old Cinderella stuff, and it sounds really good. So that's a look. It's not a big collection, but there's not a lot out there unless you get into singles and stuff like that. But my Cinderella collection for you to take a look at. What do you think? You got any Cinderella fans out there? What did you think of Tom's solo album? What's your favorite from Cinderella? Comment below. Your comments are always welcome. Thanks for watching Tim's Final Confessions.